So, business ethics, it's about doing morally the right thing. Morally the right thing. Okay, when you think about business ethics, think about the departments. The departments being marketing, operations, HR, finance. Also, your units 3, 4, 5 and 6. Why do I say that? So, think departments. Business ethics. Examples of departments doing morally the wrong thing. So marketing, it could be inappropriate advertising at children, for example with sugary drinks or junk food. Operations, an example of doing morally the wrong thing, could be exploiting producers in developing countries. You could be paying extremely low amounts in terms of your trade terms with them, and you're doing it just because you can. So you're exploiting them, and you're exploiting those producers in developing countries. You're exploiting them and reducing their living standards, and that's just perhaps not fair, not ethical, not morally the right thing. 3, HR. So you could be using 0-hour contracts for your employees, so really exploiting them. You're taking advantage of your employees. You might, for example, never give training to your employees just to save costs, even though they need to have some training. Finance. So you could be using tax havens to avoid paying tax. The result of that is less tax revenues for the government to spend on things like the NHS or education. Business ethics, the heart of the debate is, and this should always be in your question, if you need to write the heart of the debate is, do it, show you understand the question, because the heart of the debate will be about ethics versus profits. That's the heart of the debate, that there's a trade-off, and that the more ethical you are will probably lead to you being less profitable. Not always, but probably. Because of these 2 reasons. Because if you're more ethical, it's probably going to increase your costs or lower your revenues. One of those 2 things may happen. Let's go through the cons of being ethical, the problems to being ethical. So firstly, it will possibly lead to lower profits. Lower profits. Now I've talk about each department, so just go through each department. So lower profits. Why in the case of marketing could it lead to lower profits? Because if you're no longer doing these inappropriate adverts at children, then that means you might be making less sales from those children because you're no longer doing them, because you're being ethical. Less sales, less profits. So that's the revenue side. Lower profits because of operations. Well, if you're no longer exploiting producers and you're using fair trade, so you're giving a fair terms of trade with those producers in developing countries, then that's going to increase your costs. You're going to have higher costs, which will lead to lower profits. Think about HR. If you stop using 0-hour contracts, you do morally the right thing, then your wage bill is going to increase. If your wage bill increases, that's one of your costs. If your costs increase, that's going to lower your profits. Go back to it and come back to finance. Finance, if you stop using tax havens and do morally the right thing and become ethical, then that means you're paying more tax. More tax means more costs. More costs means lower profits. So the absolute key here is to just go through each of the departments. And when you think about that, think about the modules in your course. Number 2, so cons of being ethical. Well, if you've got lower profits, your reaction might be that you increase your prices because you're desperate for that extra revenue, which will hopefully lead to extra profits. But if you increase your profits, that could lead to lower sales, because think about the law of demand, is that if you increase your prices, you're likely to have less demand. Now, like everything, we can look at the evaluation. So this is, if you're ethical, what the problems could be. But you could come from the other side of the argument and say, however, the evaluation points are. So number 1 is that if you decide to be ethical, you could say that you could adapt your marketing strategy to say how ethical you are and how you use ethics in your practice. For example, maybe you use fair trade. We've seen it with a lot of different companies, particularly companies that are involved with cocoa. such as chocolate companies. They say often that they're fair trade if you see it in shops. So you could say your marketing team could make a big deal about you being a fair trade company, and that could lead to extra customers because customers might like that about you and think, hey, I'll pay that extra bit of price because you're fair trade. So it might lead to that reaction. Extra customers, extra sales, extra revenue, and hopefully extra profits. Number 2, well, if you're now ethical, you might get ethical finance. And what I mean by that is that there are investors out there, particularly if you're a public limited company, there are certain investors that will only invest in ethical projects, ethical companies. And so you might catch their attention now if you make a big deal about how ethical you are. So that gives you the possibility of getting that ethical finance. So it could get those loans that you need, or perhaps the equity that you need, which either way is finance for you to expand your business, to invest and expand and create extra long-term profits. And number 3, so the third evaluation point is that if you have ethical HR, so human resources, maybe you're giving not just 0-hour contracts, you're giving proper wages now, also you're giving adequate training, you're training your employees properly so they can do their job properly and they feel proud about their job, then that might lead to more motivation and go through the same chains of analysis. More motivation, higher productivity leads to perhaps a lower average cost, and it could lead to higher profits. So remember, the heart of the debate is ethics and profits. Always remember that. Good luck with your exams.